Folks, we made it. It is game week within the Big Ten Conference, which means we are previewing football games, finally, for the first time since January. I'm excited. You're excited. Let's get it going. This is Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
We made it through the long, cold winter. We made it through spring practice. We made it through spring games. We made it through fall camp, and now here we are. It is week one. It is the beginning. It is a fresh start of a Big Ten college football season. Everybody's teams are going 12-0. Everybody's teams are going to the college football playoff. But when we reconvene next Tuesday, maybe people will feel maybe just a little bit different. We're going to preview some big-time non-conference games today. I'm so excited about what we have on today's show, what we have on Thursday's show. I'm so excited for Thursday night. I'm so excited for Saturday, Friday, Sunday, every day. All sorts of Big Ten football this week as well. Now, here's a quick programming note on Thursday, since I will be at the Minnesota-North Carolina game on Thursday night. Thursday's show will air a little bit earlier. It will air in the afternoon sometime prior to those matchups as well. Thursday, going to preview some USC-LSU Sunday night Big Ten football as well. If it's your first time dropping by Big Nation on the YouTube side, subscribe so you know when the next Big Nation is coming at you as well. The like will really help out a lot as well. Also on audio platforms right now on Spotify, hoping to get on Apple here in a little bit as well, but follow on Spotify so you know when the new audio version of the show is also coming at you, and on Twitter X at Big Ten Ted over there with some shorter clips and some fun, interesting content. All Big Ten all year long. We've got you covered on social media as well. Let's head to the game plan. What we're talking about here today: football. Two big non-conference games for two Big Ten teams. I think we're going to find out a lot about these two teams in these two non-conference games to start. Penn State going on the road to take on the West Virginia Mountaineers. And then you've got the Minnesota Golden Gophers in the back half of a home-and-home against the North Carolina Tar Heels. They host the Baby Blues, UNC, on Thursday night on Fox. We're also going to be talking about the rest of the Big Ten Conference here in week number one. Now, not every single team has a big-time test right out of the gate. Thankfully, I think for some of these teams across the Big Ten, they want to get their feet under them to really start off this football season. I want to talk about some hashtag goals for all of the teams within the Big Ten. Some of them play some FCS schools. They play some directional MAC schools. They play some G5 schools. So they might not have the same goals as, say, Penn State, Minnesota, or USC in those big week one matchups, but they have different goals. What do I want to find out from all 18 Big Ten teams in week number one? What do these teams need to accomplish in week one to have success going into week number two? We're going to tackle that as well. Over the weekend, Michigan received their notice of allegations as it pertains to the Connor Stallions and sign-stealing investigation. Going to tackle that as well. And there's no better time than the present to tackle that. Let's start first with the Michigan Wolverines and their notice of allegations appearing on Ward Manuel's desk over the weekend. Look, I hate talking about this, especially right as it's week one of the Big Ten college football season, but the NCAA doesn't operate on the same clock that you and I do. They do things on their own time. Timing is such a big issue when it comes to this NOA that Michigan received over the weekend. First, I want to talk about this upcoming Connor Stallions documentary. Just days before this documentary was set to be released, that's when this NOA appeared on campus at the University of Michigan. I don't think that's by a coincidence per se. I think they want to get ahead of the game. I think they want to get ahead of what Connor Stallions has to say. I'm so intrigued to see what that documentary is going to look like. I think this is a part of that Netflix Untold series. Johnny Manziel, the Florida teams, Urban Meyer from the mid-2000s was a part of this. I remember watching that Florida documentary and thinking, I feel like they left some stuff out. I feel like they left some food on the table as it maybe pertained to the off-the-field issues that those teams had. So I'm very curious as to, one, how much information Connor Stallions is willing to divulge in this, and number two, how much of that information is going to make it into the Netflix documentary as well. A lot of moving parts, I think, as it pertains to that. But that's just the next rung on the ladder. That's just the next step as it pertains to this investigation. Look, if you're a rival fan base, if you're just a team that wants to know, look, what's going to happen? What are these violations? Like, this is just another step, right? This is just another spoke on the wheel. Okay, it's going to keep on turning. We're not going to know for a while. We're not going to know for a while. Let's just say that. When you look at the NCAA, they're a lot, they are a governing body of sorts, but they're a lot like a government organization that you might see in your state capital, that you might see in Washington, D.C. The rungs of government turn very, very slowly, and they turn very, very slowly normally in the NCAA. But when you're on the NCAA's radar, maybe, like Michigan is, I think maybe that wheel, we talked about, those spokes on the wheel, maybe it just turns a little bit faster. Maybe it moves up on the priority list a little bit, right? Let's look back at those COVID violations, the cheeseburger gate violations, so to speak. Of course, they happened during 2020. And we just saw that 4-year show cause for Jim Harbaugh 4 years later. And we saw some news on this also during the spring in April. So that's a 4-year time period. But this one, of course, happened in mid to late October last year, and we've got a notice of allegations about 8 to 9 months later. So this thing is moving a little bit faster, I think, with the NCAA right now. Look, there's no love lost between Michigan and this organization that currently resides over college athletics. But to me, the timing, so many different factors on the timing, is interesting between the NCAA and this Michigan case. Now let's talk about a different kind of timing. The time that Michigan has to respond. Now that the notice of allegations has been delivered to Michigan, they have 90 days to respond to this case. Now, over the weekend, Saturday is when this was reported. A lot of people out there saying, hey, 90 days from now, it's the Saturday before Michigan plays Ohio State. Look, it might have been a couple of days earlier, a little bit earlier that it was delivered, and that's the date in the 90 days. However that is, it is going to be the week-ish before they play the Ohio State Buckeyes. So once again, timing very interesting on the part of the NCAA. I don't know if there's any coincidences throughout all of this from the NCAA point of view as well, which is also very, very interesting to me and not surprising in and of the slightest. Now, I do not foresee Michigan responding to this case before 88 days, 89 days, right? I think they might do it on the 90th day. Because when you look at how Sharon Moore wants this team to play, how focused he wants them to be, he doesn't want this hanging over their head, because if they respond, we'll talk about hearings in just a minute, right? Then the next step in the process begins. I don't think Michigan wants the next step in the process to begin until after the season. Okay, that's where they want to be. You look at what it was last year, I think that they were fighting this thing during the season, one, to continue to motivate Michigan versus everybody. They used that mantra during the year last year, but I think they wanted to fight this thing as long as they did and as long as they could, so they could achieve their goal of winning a national championship, and that's what they were able to do. You look at this year. I think they're going to drag out that 90 days as long as they can. I don't think we're going to hear anything more from this really during the regular season. And then we'll see exactly how quick this thing is with a hearing once we get past that Ohio State football game. Because after that 90 days, the school could then be assigned a hearing in front of the NCAA's Committee on Infraction, though a negotiated resolution is still possible. So keep that in mind. I know rival fan bases. I know people want to know, what are the violations going to be? Is the hammer truly going to be dropped on the University of Michigan? Look, I know this is a hint, and I know you really want to know, but I don't think we're going to know until after the season. I think I would maybe circle the spring as maybe when we'll really, really know what the future of Michigan football looks like. Now, let's talk about the future of Michigan football, because it's so interesting. Some might say there's this shadow over this Michigan football program, but recruiting hasn't reflected that. Michigan is recruiting pretty darn well right now. Sharon Moore has done a really good job not let the off-the-field things affect them, saying, hey, we went out there 15-0, we won a national championship. Now let's take this recruiting effort to that next level. So that hasn't overshadowed this program. What will happen when the violations are handed out? TBD. But right now, the image of the program is still fantastic at the University of Michigan. They are operating like a top-tier Big Ten program, certainly, throughout all of that as well. I'll finish with this. I would be shocked if Michigan has to vacate victories. I would be shocked if Michigan has to vacate a Big Ten championship. I would be the most shocked if Michigan has to vacate a national championship. Look, there's been many national analysts out there. I think Joel Klatt said it. Hey, if you really know football, you know, yes, did they gain an advantage, a slight advantage? Yes. Yes, they did. But in terms of completely shifting multiple results of football games, he wasn't as confident on that. Michigan, like, you look at their talent, you look at the National Football League and how many players from last year's team were drafted. They just had really, really good players. Now, did something shady happen? Yeah, I think it did. Will they be punished? Absolutely. They will be punished. But I don't think, everybody talks about the theoretical hammer. I just don't know if that theoretical hammer is going to be dropped in maybe some ways that maybe Ohio State fans or Michigan State fans, we love you, but maybe it's not going to be dropped in that form or fashion. I think you could see a probation of sorts. I think you could see fines. I think you could see, if it's bad enough, if the NCAA investigation is motivated enough, I could maybe even see a postseason ban, possibly for 1 year. But I don't see things retroactively affecting Michigan football and the accomplishments that they earned on the field. But I think it's going to affect the future of the program more than anything. And the future of Michigan football is one of the more fascinating futures, not only in the Big Ten, but in all of college football. Now, that's behind us. Look, that's an off-season topic. This is not the off-season. We are officially in season, which means we're going to talk some football because I want to, and that's what the Almighty intended. Let's start first with the Minnesota Golden Gophers and the North Carolina Tar Heels. That is the first game chronologically. That will happen on a Thursday night. I will be there. One of the more intriguing Big Ten football games has the Minnesota Golden Gophers hosting the Tar Heels of North Carolina Thursday night on Fox. Now, when I first start to break down this matchup, I was at an event last week at the University of Minnesota, a football event over there, a really great event. Tasted some great foods that you're going to see at the Minnesota concession stands here this week. Talking to some staffers from Minnesota, there was a quote that I thought was very interesting that I heard that I had in conversation. They got dudes, we got dudes. And I think there's two different sets of dudes. I think there's two certain ways that both of these teams want to win this football game. So let's get right into it. Why don't we? Talking about this matchup, dudes versus dudes, North Carolina taking on the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Now, this line on this matchup originally favored the Minnesota Golden Gophers. But on Monday, this thing flipped, now -1.5 in favor of the Tar Heels of North Carolina. I think a big reason why this thing flipped in favor of Mac Brown and the Baby Blues is because of the status of Darius Taylor and Daniel Jackson. A couple of weeks ago, it was reported Darius Taylor limping at practice, Daniel Jackson maybe overcoming some injuries as well, maybe banged up a little bit. PJ Fleck at the time said, hey, those guys are going to be fine, but there's still some question marks as it pertains to those two guys. If those two guys, top running back, top receiver, are not ready to go by the time this game, or I should say that this way, if those two guys are not playing at full 100%, then I think this thing changes a lot, because especially Darius Taylor, Minnesota, and I'll get into it, Minnesota is so dependent, I think, in what Darius Taylor brings to the table in this football game to play the way they want to play. Another big question throughout this game is North Carolina's quarterback situation. It was reported a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, Mac Brown, he's not releasing any depth charts. Look, we know how close PJ Fleck plays to the vest as well, as it pertains to injury, as it pertains to information and access that he gives to his football program. So that's what I think makes this game so fun. I think that's what it makes it so interesting and intriguing, is this gamesmanship, this chess match between these two coaches that historically really don't offer a lot. So we go into this game, I think, with a lot of mystery, and I think we could see a lot of fun action up and down the field. Of course, the quarterback situation, I think it favors Max Johnson personally. Look, he's got 4 years of experience, 2 years at LSU, 2 years of Texas A&M. Look, you could see some other guys into the fold as well, but whoever is at quarterback for the North Carolina Tar Heels, look, you had a first-round draft pick. You had Drake May, who was drafted highly in the first round of the NFL draft. You're going to take a step back at the quarterback position. Another place that North Carolina is going to take a step back is on the offensive line. The Tar Heels lose 4 of their 5 starters up front. And that's where I want to start with this preview, in talking about what Minnesota can really attack on North Carolina. When you look at the matchup on the line of scrimmage, when North Carolina has the football, I think it favors Minnesota. I think the line of scrimmage on both sides favors the Golden Gophers. PJ Fleck really needs to play into that. Okay, you've got 2 sophomores slated to start at tackle, and then you've got pass rushers like John Joyner. You got Danny Strigo in the middle. You got Jalen Logan Redding. You got Devin Eastern. Like, you've got a lot of good depth on the defensive line. I think they're going to rotate some pieces throughout that as well. They need to get into the face of Max Johnson or whoever is starting at quarterback for the North Carolina Tar Heels. Because if this Tar Heel offense is able to have their routes develop down the field, if the quarterback is able to get the ball into the hands of these playmakers, that could equal some problems for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. When you look at North Carolina, they returned 5 of their 6 leading pass catchers from last season. Basically, they return everybody minus Tez Walker. There's a lot of really good players. Nate McCollum, who had a big catch in this game last season, touchdown. J.J. Jones, tight end Bryson Nesbitt as well down the field. And then when you look at Minnesota and their defense, the strength, I believe, is in the front 7. The weakness is on the back end in the secondary. We saw that in last year's matchup, where this team, where Drake May unleashed throwing the ball down the field. He got confidence. He got into a rhythm, 414 yards, and that was a secondary with Tyler Nubin. Now you don't have Nubin back there. That's a big question, I think, for Minnesota. Minnesota cannot let North Carolina get into a rhythm in this passing game. They can't. If they do, I think North Carolina could put up a good amount of points in this matchup. So you need to let these dogs eat on the defensive line, because if that front group, I mentioned the names up front for Minnesota, if that front group can't get pressure on their own. And that's a defensive coordinator's dream, to have your front defensive line be the guys that continuously get pressure on the quarterback. But now all of a sudden you got to send defensive backs, you got to send linebackers, and now that puts some of your corners, your nickels, etc., into one-on-one matchups against these playmakers down the field for North Carolina. And those guys, if you bring extra guys, they better get home. Quarterbacks for North Carolina cannot sit in the pocket and be comfortable. I thought one thing that was very interesting about last year's game was Amarian Hampton. Look, throughout the season last year, this was a guy that rushed for over 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns. Certainly one of the best backs in the ACC, if not all of college football, the way he runs the ball. But when he faced Minnesota, he didn't run the football very well. 13 carries, 46 yards. He did get into the end zone, but Minnesota did a really good job containing him last year. Now I think they're going to need to do that again, because now all of a sudden, with a quarterback that isn't a first-round draft pick, now all of a sudden, if this offense becomes balanced and Amarian Hampton is able to get his in the run game, I think that takes pressure off. It puts this Minnesota defense on their heels a little bit, and it allows the playbook to be expanded that much more for Mac Brown and this North Carolina Tar Heels team as well. So I think a really good scenario, I won't say a perfect scenario, but a really good scenario I think for Minnesota would be, hey, let's contain Amarian Hampton. Let's hold him under 100 yards once again in the rush game. And even though the throw game, the weapons on the outside, it could be the strengths of this North Carolina offense, let's attack. Let's get them into 3rd and longs, and let's let our boys eat up front. I think those are the situations that you want to get North Carolina into as well. Let's talk about this from the Minnesota offensive point of view. You see the last bullet point on the graphic there. Can they play their way? The Minnesota way? Pound the rock, pound the rock, pound the rock. Darius Taylor and this run game is so important to the success of Minnesota, not only in this football game, but throughout this 2024 season as well. Gotta start off the right way, because your offense could be your best defense in this football game as well. If you can dominate the line of scrimmage, if you can dominate with the run game, and we know PJ Fleck wants to do that, wants to be physical at the point of attack. It certainly leans into what Minnesota, how they've built their team, what their personnel certainly looks like. So if they can dominate with the run game, keep those explosive weapons on the sidelines, and then wear down this North Carolina front, hands on hips. We want to see that North Carolina defensive line late 3rd quarter, early 4th quarter with their hands on their hips. You want to see them gassed. And then you want to rotate guys at running back. They've brought in a lot of running back depth this season. So you want to see that for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. You want to be able to wear them down. Running the ball well on 1st down is going to be a key to set up favorable 2nd and 3rd down and shorts as well, to keep on moving the football down the field as well. It's so important to set the tone early in this game, because if you have a 10-point deficit where North Carolina is leading in the 4th quarter, can Max Brosmer lead you back? Can Max Brosmer connect with some of these targets? Because outside of Daniel Jackson, I think there are some questions with Elijah Spencer. There's some questions with Lemeki Brockington, maybe in this pass game. I think that's an answer. That's something we're going to see answered in this game. How good is Max Brosmer? Like we've seen all of the box scores. We've seen all of the stats. We've seen all of the tape with him at the FCS level and how he can spin it at that level. Can he do it against a Power 4 type of team in the North Carolina Tar Heels as well? Darius Taylor had a lot of success against UNC last year, rushing for 138 yards. If they get him going early, I think Minnesota could control this football game. Let's talk about weather for a minute. 80% chance of rain earlier in the day. It's around 50-50 at the time of kickoff. That certainly favors Minnesota, right? If we get some elements where maybe it's a little bit more difficult to throw the football down the field, I think that plays into the hands of PJ Fleck. I think that plays into the hands of Minnesota, where this game could be slowed down a little bit. and let this offensive line eat. I mentioned the advantage in the trenches on defense, and I think like Minnesota, I think has one of the better offensive lines in the Big Ten, certainly. I think that they could have a really good day going straight at them, eating some big-time meals up front against the North Carolina Tar Heels. It's going to be that contrast of styles. North Carolina wants to make plays down the field. Minnesota maybe wants to play this game in a box a little bit and play that traditional Big Ten style of play. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to see this one go down in Minneapolis. Minnesota isn't the only team that's going to be playing a big non-conference game outside of USC and LSU on Sunday night, before USC and LSU on Sunday night. How about big noon Saturday? The Penn State Nittany Lions traveling to take on the West Virginia Mountaineers. There has been a lot of back and forth between the Nittany Lion and Mountaineer fan bases online. Well, one fan base is going to be right, and the other one is going to be a little bit wrong in this one. And I'm excited to really find out exactly how Penn State is going to match up against the West Virginia Mountaineers. Because when I really start to break this football game down, a big storyline for me is that West Virginia run game. Neil Brown's Mountaineers, man, this is a team that can run the football. They've got a three-headed monster in the backfield, which of course includes their quarterback, Garrett Green. Jaheim White, C.J. Donaldson, and Garrett Green combined for over 2,400 yards and 28 touchdowns last season. That's the big matchup, because when you look at West Virginia through the air, they lose their top target at wide receiver, and Garrett Green, fun fact, Garrett Green completes the same amount of passes as Ethan Kaliak-Manis did last season at Minnesota. Just 54% through the air. I feel great about Penn State's defensive backs matching up with what West Virginia has in the pass game, which I think means the Nittany Lions are going to be able to move more towards the line of scrimmage to stop this run game. I feel very confident. You know, a lot of people talk about Danny Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter off the edge in terms of pass rush situations. I think their speed and their quickness to get down the line of scrimmage is also going to be a factor in this game as well. I think although West Virginia returns a lot of experience on their offensive line, I think it's going to be a tough matchup for the Mountaineers up front. Really, when I look at this entire matchup between Penn State and West Virginia, one phrase just sticks into my head and I can't get it out. It's a good Big 12 team versus a great Big 10 team. And I think you're going to see the difference. Look, West Virginia is a team that 1 out of 10 that can contend for that Big 12 championship this year. I firmly believe that. But I think you're going to see the depth. I think you're going to see the depth of talent on display within this football game. Let's talk about Penn State offensively here for just a minute. Now, there's been a lot of flack thrown at Drew Aller, right? Of course, he didn't play the best, and that could be for many reasons, but he did not play the best in the big games last season. Michigan, Ohio State, of course, being the ones that everybody circles. But he had a really good stat line as a first-year starting quarterback. Now, his best game last season may have come against these West Virginia Mountaineers. If you look at how Drew Aller threw the football, 21 of 29, 325 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Of course, they were able to stretch the field early on. Keandre Lambert-Smith, that big touchdown pass to really start things off in that matchup. And I think Drew Aller could have some similar success throwing the football. And I think if I'm Andy Kotelnicki, and if I'm Penn State drawing up a game plan for this one, I want to try to test West Virginia through the air. West Virginia had a better run defense last year than they did a pass defense. Pass defense, they were about middle of the pack last season in the Big 12. And I want to get Julian Fleming going. I want to get Harrison Wallace going, who had 7 catches and 72 yards against the Mountaineers last year. I want to get Tyler Warren going. Look, a lot of people might look to the X and the Z out there at wide receiver, but I think Tyler Warren could have a really big game. I think he's a matchup nightmare for this West Virginia defense. I really do. Now that Theo Johnson is out of the way, I think Tyler Warren is going to rise to the occasion. I think Tyler Warren can be one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten, meaning he can be one of the best tight ends in college football. I really believe that. He put up some really good numbers last season. I think he could really burst onto the scene. I think week 1 is a place, certainly, for him to do it. So, test this secondary early. See what you got. See where Drew Aller is within this Andy Kotelnicki scheme. I think you got players that can stretch the field. I think you got players that can beat West Virginia deep. And then I think what that's going to do is it's going to open up some run lanes. It's going to open things up for Nicholas Singleton. It's going to open things up for Katron Allen. It's going to get less guys in the box if you can have success throwing the football down the field. I know West Virginia went to the transfer portal, getting a couple of Northwestern Wildcats, right? Jaheeb Joseph, Garnett Hollis Jr. transferred in. So they tried to go to the portal to get some guys to help out. I don't really see a ton of guys in the portal on this team in that West Virginia secondary that's, made a super significant upgrade where all of a sudden I can say, well, I don't know. Even though Penn State, right, isn't exactly the best wide receiver room in the Big Ten, I think that they can have success in this football game. I think they're going to come up to the line of scrimmage defensively. I think they're going to slow down this run game. Now, West Virginia could have a little bit of success early on. Yeah, I could see this game being fairly close early in this matchup, and then when you get later on, like when you get past halftime, new coordinators on offense, new coordinator on defense for Penn State. Once they're able to kind of get in the locker room, figure things out, in a 60-minute game, I just don't see West Virginia going toe-to-toe, tick for tack with a team like Penn State. There's a reason why Penn State is ranked the place that they're at. Like, West Virginia is a Big 12 championship contender. Penn State is a college football playoff contender. And then I mentioned the good Big 12 versus great Big 10. I think you're going to see the difference as this game goes on. In the end, I just think too many matchups favor the Penn State Nittany Lions. In the end, I just think the Nittany Lions are just too skilled. I think over a 60-minute game, this one certainly favors Penn State, but I think they could be tested early on in this matchup against West Virginia on the road in Morgantown. Coming up on the other side of some big facts, what does every single team in the Big Ten, all 18, what do they need to accomplish? What are some hashtag goals that they have in their Week 1 matchup? That's right after these big facts. At the beginning of every college football season, teams have goals, whether that goal is to become bowl eligible, finally get a winning season, whether it's to make the college football playoff, whether it's to win it all and hoist that national championship trophy. Everybody's got their season goals. They build up to it throughout fall camp and into the season. But of course, it starts with this week. It starts with week number 1. There's so much change. There's so many moving pieces, whether it be transfers or freshmen coming in from high school that are expected to step up. We talked about in a previous show how much shuffling there is going on and how much newness that there is going on at the quarterback position. Now, you got to start off your goals in week 1. If you want to get to bowl eligibility, you want to get to the playoff, you want to win a national championship, it all starts with this week. And we're going to find out, I think, a lot of information. Now, we're not going to answer every question in week 1. And just because it looks like it's going a certain way on one particular question, we don't overreact here at Big Nation, okay? Things can obviously change throughout the season, but there are goals that I have for every Big Ten football team, things that I think I want to see maybe not totally answered because we won't get every single total answer in week number 1, but I want to see it trending in a certain direction to help every single one of these 18 football teams in the Big Ten Conference. Where I want to start off with, let's start chronologically, and let's start with the Scarlet Knights of Rutgers. We talked to Richie O'Leary from the Night Report last week after the injury of Mohamed Toure, and then he also mentioned Tyrene Powell, and Greg Schiano also has said at his press availability that we're not sure the status of Tyrene Powell for game number 1 against the Howard Bison. So What I want to see accomplished by Rutgers is who's going to step up into that linebacker role beside Tyreen Powell when Tyreen Powell comes back eventually to action. Is it going to be Moses Walker? Is it going to be somebody else? You got to think when you play an opponent like Howard, there's going to be a lot of guys rotating through in that spot. So let's see who steps up to the table. Let's see who can accomplish that goal for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights going forward, because whoever steps in that role, they're going to need them to be very good alongside Tyreen Powell. Let's talk about the Minnesota Golden Gophers. This is a team that needs to be better on the back end of their defense. Their goal in week number 1, be better against the pass. Be better in coverage. Just be better as a secondary. We mentioned earlier in the show how Drake May passed for 414 yards against the secondary last season, and now they don't have Tyler Nubin, right? We're going to find out just how close they are to achieving that goal in week number 1, because if that pass rush can't constantly get home, North Carolina is going to look to throw the football. We know that they have a new quarterback, but we're going to find out exactly what the Golden Gophers are going to look like on the back end. And when you look at some of these games later in the season, you look at USC is on the schedule, UCLA has a pretty good passing attack as well. I think for this team to get to bowl eligibility, they need to be better against the pass on defense, certainly. Let's talk about the Illinois Fighting Illini. You saw Luke Altmaier at the end of last season. Of course, he got hurt. John Paddock went in, and he played much better, right, than Luke did during his time there. I think you want to a goal has to be get Luke Altmaier's confidence going early and keep it going as QB1. Look, I know there could be a temptation to just line up at the line of scrimmage with this really good offensive line with Caden Fagan back there in the backfield and just pound the rock, but I want to see them throw it a little bit against Eastern Illinois in that matchup on Thursday night. Get Luke Altmaier's confidence going early, because if you can get Luke going early in the season, that passing game is just going to get better and better and better, and you're going to be more of a balanced offense, certainly throughout 2024. The Michigan State Spartans. Just hold on to the ball. The goal has to be in game 1, game 6, game 8, whatever game it is, be better in the turnover margin. Because I look at what the Spartans have talent-wise on this team, and of course that's going to be the goal. Really, every time you go out, right, coaches always say you got to win the turnover battle. Of course, the team that wins that battle wins a majority of football games, but what Michigan State was last year, remember that when they played against Nebraska, it was the Turnover Bowl? And those two teams at the time were at the bottom or top, depending on which way you look at it. They were at the bottom in the country in turning the football over. So when you bring in Aiden Childs, when you got Jack Valiant at tight end, when you got a really good running back duo, like when you got the pieces that Michigan State does on offense, you take care of the football, and this is a new coaching staff, a lot of new personnel. You take care of the football in game 1, it's going to help you certainly down the road. So hold on to that pigskin, Sparty. Let's talk about the Wisconsin Badgers on Friday night. The goal in this game has to be the goal, kind of like Michigan State with what we just talked about. The goal in game 1 is going to be the goal throughout the season. Keep Ches Malusi healthy. Because if Ches Malusi goes down again, you're going to explore the depth in this running back room. And there is solid depth. Jackson Aker, Cade Yakimelli seem to be better in fall camp. You got those two freshmen in Darian Dupree and Dylan Jones that you could possibly explore as well. Like, this is a running back room that could play 6 or 7 guys, but you don't want to have to really go that deep this early in the season to get a guy that's going to play significant snaps. So get Chelsea his early in this game, get him going in this offense, but keep him healthy. So when you get to those games in the middle of the season that are important for Wisconsin to really hitting that over this season, Ches Malusi is there, because I think Teddy Walker is going to be RB1. I think he's going to be that dependable guy eventually as the season progresses. But Ches Malusi is just such an interesting change of pace with what he brings and his skill set to the table, that if he can stay on the field into the middle and even to the end of this season, that's a very interesting combination. Very excited to see how Phil Longo could potentially use him in Madison, Wisconsin. Let's talk about the Iowa Hawkeyes taking on Illinois State in week number 1. I want to see Tim Lester establish an offensive identity. Okay, whether that's smash mouth running the football, he's used to playing that shotgun 11 personnel type of deal, whatever it is, whatever the identity is, establish it. The goal has to be establish what that is in week number 1. Of course, all of this in week 1 for a lot of these teams is going to be confidence. That's going to be such a key word, and you're going to continue to hear that here as the segment goes along. But confidence, this Iowa offense had zero of it last season. So they need to certainly build that. They need to build an identity, whatever that is, running the football, as I said, working play action off of that, tight ends, whatever it is. Building that in week number 1 will help you certainly as you get to Iowa State and Kirk Ferentz's return the next week. Let's talk about the Penn State Nittany Lions. The goal in week number 1, maintain that level of excellence on the defensive side of the football. They are taking on an excellent run game in the West Virginia Mountaineers. I think they're going to be tested. I think their linebackers, their new young linebackers that they're very excited about are going to be tested. Kobe King isn't necessarily young, but you look at Dominic DeLuca and Tony Rojas, I think those guys are going to be tested. Are they going to be in the right spot at the right time? So there's a high bar on the defensive side of the football at Penn State. We know that maybe West Virginia runs the ball certainly better than they throw the ball. So can Tom Allen get that defense to play into this? Can they really make West Virginia a one-dimensional team, keep up that high level of play that they've been playing on defense here lately, from Manny Diaz to Tom Allen? Maryland, I think it's fairly obvious what your goal should be, and your goal should be to really find which quarterback fits well into this system. Okay, it seems to be trending towards Billy Edwards. I thought it might be MJ Morris, but it seems to be trending towards Billy Edwards. And if it is Billy Edwards, how does Maryland kind of incorporate his mobility and maybe some design QB run, where maybe we didn't see a ton of that with Talia Tungavailoa? Maybe the offense looks a little bit different and Mike Loxley has to shift that around a little bit. But I think the goal has to be in week number 1, find a guy that you like, and then see how the offense can certainly fit around him over there. The goal for week 1, Purdue against Indiana State, let that offensive line eat. All right, let them get some food into their bellies because, man, they were hungry last year. This was a hungry unit. They did not do well protecting Hudson Card last season, and maintaining health, of course, has to be a goal not only this week, but as they go into the bye week and as they approach Notre Dame in week number 3 as well. Because if this offensive line eats, Devin Mockabee is going to eat, Hudson Card is going to eat, these new receivers are going to eat, Max Clare is going to eat as well. So I think the success or failure of Purdue football is going to depend on the offensive line. Now, we're not going to take a bunch from the spring game, but during the spring game, that offensive line certainly did look a lot better in West Lafayette, Indiana. Well, speaking of Indiana, staying in the state of Indiana, let's talk Hoosiers. And there's a lot of transfers, a lot of JMU kids coming in on the defensive side of the football. For Indiana, the goal has to be find out what you have on the defensive side. If you need work, let's find that out against Florida International. If you feel pretty good, let's try some things. Let's try some blitz packages. Let's try some different coverages. Let's try some things to really make ourselves better. Got UCLA coming up here early in the schedule as well. So the goal has to be just find out who you are on the defensive side of the football if you're the Indiana Hoosiers as well. Northwestern has a new offensive coordinator. Northwestern has some newness on the offensive side of the ball. Of course, there's that quarterback battle with Mike Wright and Jack Lausch as well. But if I'm the Wildcats right now, I want to create some confidence in this new type of scheme on the offensive side of the football. It's not going to be like Ben Bryant dropping back to pass and firing it down the field. I think you're going to see more of Joseph Hyman, right? That multi-talented, very electric running back for Northwestern that you saw in bits and pieces and flashes last season. I think it's going to look a little bit different, so you want to build that confidence certainly early in the season. That's an interesting week 1 game. Defending MAC champion Miami of Ohio coming into that new stadium over there. For Nebraska, right? They start things off against the UTEP Miners. Goal in week 1, dominate the line of scrimmage. I think that's going to be a big part to the MO that is Husker football in 2024. If they can dominate up front on the offensive line, on the defensive line, that is going to be, it's so key in week number 1 because it's so key to what's going to happen for Nebraska in week number 2 when they face off against the Colorado Buffaloes. Nebraska, it appears, has a big advantage on the offensive line and the defensive line versus the Buffs. And I think having those lines being at their best in week 2 is going to be a key to developing a lot of early season momentum as you continue to go forward. Because if Nebraska does what we expect them to do, dominate in the trenches in a majority of their games this season, and if Dylan Raiola is better, he will be, but if Dylan Raiola is what we expect him to be, the skill position step up, and that defense is just keeps on taking a step up under Tony White, this is a Nebraska team that's going to get a lot better, I think, as the season goes on as well. I'm going to keep this fairly short. I'm going to keep this fairly simple. When talking about Ohio State, please don't kill Akron. Please don't murder Akron, all right? Just take it easy. Stay healthy. Look, this non-conference slate is they're going to be able to coast throughout this. I think a goal has to be not to literally murder some of these teams early in the schedule because they might have the potential to do so. But, you want to stay healthy, of course, as well. Certainly get some of your starters, a lot of those early reps. And then, of course, you want to get a lot of time for these depth pieces. This is a key point for a team like Ohio State where you can get these second-teamers, these third-teamers, a lot of depth to certainly build the future of your program to be able to remain at that elite type of level. Let's talk about the Michigan Wolverines. I think the goal for week number 1 has to feel good. You want to feel good about the quarterback situation coming out of this week and going into the matchup next week, of course, against the University of Texas. You don't want to come out of this week against Fresno State feeling shaky, whether it's Alex Orji, whether it's Davis Warren, whoever it is. You want, we say confidence and confidence and confidence. We say it a lot, but that's what you want coming out of week 1. And they want to have good vibes. They want to have good feelings coming out of this game against Fresno State at the quarterback position because they're going to need it. Okay, you can't have big-time quarterback questions, I don't think, going into Texas. I think there's a probability that there will be questions, but we can't have concerns. I think there's a big difference between questions and concerns. Now it's time to spend some time on the West Coast. For UCLA, this is a lot of coach speak. It's very, been said a lot, but going out to Hawaii, there's a potential that you might not be focused. You might not be ready to play, especially with a first-time head coach, never been a coordinator, never been a head coach like Deshaun Foster. So very simple, be focused and be ready has to be your goal. If you are in that mindset, even when you're out in the beautiful shores on the Hawaiian Islands, if you're focused and you're ready, you're going to take care of business against the Rainbow Warriors. Let's talk about the Oregon Ducks. Goal has to be get this thing over by halftime, right? A lot of like what it is with the Ohio State Buckeyes. Just don't murder Idaho, but you want to take care of business, stay healthy, and certainly move on to the next week and keep building momentum as well. Let's talk about the Washington Huskies taking on FCS Weber State in week number 1. I think a goal you have is establish what you have on the offensive line and defensive line. Those are big questions for the Huskies, right? That you got a freshman and a sophomore starting at left tackle and right tackle, respectively. I think you want to establish whether it's good, whether it's not good, what you need to improve at. I think you want to establish what the trenches are after week 1. Now, going up against a team like Weber State, it's not going to tell the complete story, but I think you're going to start maybe heading in the direction of what exactly this offensive line and defensive line could look like in 2024. Going to finish things off with the USC Trojans, and we're talking fundamentals, and we're talking on the defensive side of the football. Goal has to be make stops and tackle. Like if you can tackle LSU in space, right? You get to a 3rd and 7 and they throw a quick screen, they throw a quick route, a pass out there for 3 or 4 yards, and you've got the opportunity to make that stop and get the punt team on the field for the Tigers. You have to do that, because what's going to kill this defense is if LSU can break some tackles, if it looks a lot like the same, I'm talking USC's defense, if it looks a lot like the same as it has in years past, recent years past, on the defensive side of the football. So you've got to make those plays in open space. And then if you're the offense, of course, you've got to make them, and you've got to be able to break those tackles as well. But making those plays on defense, I know they might not seem like a big deal when you're in this game, but making those open field tackles will go a long way for the USC Trojans to making and getting a big win here in week number 1. We're going to finish the show off, 3rd edition of Big Nation off, with talking about something that you've wanted to know for a very long time. I've wanted to know for a very long time, and finally we have some answers. Big Ten tiebreakers. If we get a tie between the 2nd place team and the 3rd place team with 8-1 conference records, who gets in? If we have a 3-way tie, whatever it is, if we have some sort of tie, who makes it to Indianapolis? Of course, with 18 teams, no divisions, I think you're going to be using this tiebreaker quite a bit. So here is what the Big Ten released on Monday as to what the tiebreakers will be. They waited almost until the 10th hour, maybe not quite the 11th hour, but maybe the 9th or 10th hour to release this. Of course, head-to-head is going to be at the top. Record against common opponents is the next thing. So if Ohio State and Penn State are tied and they've played 3 of the same teams, if Ohio State is 2-1 against those teams, Penn State is 1-2, for example, then Ohio State in that example would make the Big Ten championship game as well. Eventually, it kind of comes down to the record of some of those teams as well. Analytics gets down there as well. And then eventually, a random draw. Man, should we get to a random draw? What a great television product that would be. Televised on the Big Ten Network, maybe some of the highest ratings that they've ever gotten, right? NBA draft lottery style with all maybe 2 ping pong balls in there. Someone puts their hand in there and they draw one out there as well. You look at the analytics with the highest ranking by Sports Source Analytics is the specific one out there as well. So this is on tune with maybe what the SEC did, right? When you look at common opponents, and then when you go down to analytics and then random draw also at the end. I'm very curious to see how many times that this determines who makes it to Indianapolis. There have been rumors out there floated that maybe even semifinals, another round of Big Ten playoffs, so to speak, could possibly come in the future. Maybe pods and divisions come back, but for the time being, this is what we're working with. And I think these next few years, might determine a lot of what the structure looks like in terms of the Big Ten championship and in terms of other conferences as well, the SEC, the Big 12, the ACC, the Group of Five, and some of these other conferences as well. So, with the 12-team playoff going on, and we're kind of in this learning curve a little bit. And the 12-team playoff is a very interesting conversation because there have been schools of thoughts out there that says, hey, maybe I don't even want to go to the Big Ten championship game, right? I want to take that week off, prepare for the playoff the next week. There's something advantageous to that going on. Okay, now the Big Ten championship does get you that bye into the next round, but if you're in line to get to that 5 seed where you can play the G5 champion as the number 12, and then maybe something like a Big 12 or an ACC champion, right, that next tier, down under the Power 2, now all of a sudden, maybe that's looking a little bit better. So over the next few years, we're really going to find out a lot what works, what teams want, what they don't, how conferences are going to structure this in the future. But for now, these are the tiebreakers when it comes down to the Big Ten. We'll see if these are going to be in play this season. A team's ability to get a bye in the first round might come down to their record against maybe some of the other teams in the Big Ten. Maybe their record, their ability to avoid an upset could get you into the Big Ten Championship. That wraps up another edition of Big Nation. On Thursday's edition of Big Nation, we've got a preview of USC and LSU. It is game week, my friends. Until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. This has been Big Nation.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.